Tanya Whitfield didn't fit the typical image of an FBI agent. She didn't wear a suit jacket, no gun slung over her hip, no shiny badge hanging across her chest. Just a dark green maxi dress, simple flats, and gold hoop earrings, a casual, easygoing outfit, as if she'd spent the day blowing up balloons and cutting a cake for her niece's 8th birthday. And she did. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore barely any makeup. Tanya looked like an ordinary woman who just left a cozy family gathering in Monroe. It was dusk when she pulled off the highway and headed home to McDonough, Georgia. It was a quiet neighborhood, a place with neatly trimmed lawns and children playing basketballs in wide driveways. Another turn and she was in her garage, until a flashing red and green light behind her brought her to a stop. Tanya frowned. She knew she had done nothing wrong, no speeding, no red light. She turned on her signal, pulled over, and rolled down her window halfway. No worries, she told herself. She knew the procedure. She had taught it. But theory was one thing. Experience was another. The officer approached the car with a cold, urgent air. No greeting. No explanation. Turn off the engine. Hands on the wheel, he ordered. Tanya did. No reaction, no protest. She kept her voice even. Excuse me, may I know why I was pulled over? I'm the one asking the questions here. He almost shouted. Where are you from? A family reunion in Monroe, she said. I'm alone. He walked around to the back of the car, scrutinized the license plate, then turned back to the window. His eyes never left Tanya's face, as if trying to match her to someone else in his mind. This car fits the description of a burglary 2 blocks away. Tanya blinked. Her. A burglar? Can I see your identification? She asked, her hands still on the wheel. Keep your hands there. I want to see them. His voice was still suspicious. There was a long silence, then she said softly, I have a badge in my wallet. I'm Agent Whitfield, FBI. He paused. His suspicion turned to surprise. He looked at Tanya again, and this time, he really looked. Not at a suspect, but at a person. Can I see the badge? He said, his voice dropping. Your wallet is in your bag, on the passenger seat. I'll take it slow, okay? She asked, polite but not afraid. He nodded, almost embarrassed. Tanya gently opened her bag, handing over her FBI badge. There was no mistaking it. Her name. Her picture. Her rank. The mood changed dramatically. He let out a breath, as if realizing his mistake. I'm sorry, Agent Whitfield. I didn't realize. It's okay, Tanya laughed softly. We all want to keep the community safe, right? He nodded. A little embarrassed, but also something close to grateful, that she hadn't gotten angry, hadn't made a big deal out of it. My niece wouldn't believe me if I told her, she added, her tone light. For the first time in my life, I was suspected of a crime right after I finished my birthday cake. They both laughed. Not loudly, but genuinely. Tanya drove away, the dusk still lingering on the road. The policeman stood, his hand on his belt, watching the silver car drive away, with a deeper respect for the woman, and a lesson he would never forget, but she stopped. Her finger was still there, hanging in midair. Her eyes never left the wheel. I was reaching into my pocket for my ID. It was right there, on the seat beside me. I won't let you. She said. Put your hand up. This isn't formality. It didn't even make sense. And that's when, something shifted inside her. A small click, as soft as a breath. A quiet moment, where instinct took over every word. She knew that whatever came out now would define the entire next 5 minutes. But she didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just sat there, as calm as if ready to let the world go. She let him believe she was in control. But she was watching, every detail. His grip on the flashlight. The hard tilt of his shoulders. The way he looked through her without ever really seeing her. A second patrol car pulled up. Red and blue flashing lights reflected on her face. Tanya felt her fingers tingle. She didn't even realize how tightly her hands were gripping the steering wheel. The second officer, a woman, stood on the sidelines, not moving forward. Just watching. Tanya watched her for a long moment. Hoping for a signal. Something like a human heart. A pause. But no one came. "I need you out of the car," Kessler said, almost shouting. Tanya took a breath. "I'm a cop. I'm getting my ID. Get out. Right. Now." She unbuckled her seatbelt. Not fast, not slow, just precise. Her badge, in her wallet. Hidden on the passenger side. But she knew, no room for sudden movements. Her left foot touched the ground. Then her right. She stood in front of him. She wasn't tall. But she had never needed height to keep her grounded. "Turn around." He didn't wait. Grabbing her wrists, turning her around roughly. Her hands were shoved behind her back. Cold metal, the sound of handcuffs clinking. Tanya said nothing. The policewoman stepped forward then, finally. Her face was no longer just observing. Something flashed across her eyes. Surprise, confusion. Something close to regret. Tanya looked at her, not with reproach. But as if waiting for something. Something simple. That someone would speak up at the right moment. Kessler was restrained, muttering into his radio. His voice was hoarse, broken by anger or worry. His hand pressed against her shoulder. Not hard, but enough to get her attention. Tanya's jaw clenched, but not from pain. She had seen this behavior too many times. From criminals trying to hide their fear. From rookies out of tune, not used to the pressure. But never, this close. Never with herself. Things got worse when she reached for her wallet, intending to hand over her ID. Kessler snatched it from her as if afraid of being tricked. Tanya stood by the car, her wrists cuffed behind her back. The cold steel bit into her skin, but her mind was elsewhere. The wind blew through her thin office dress, but she didn't feel cold. All her thoughts came together in one point. Stay calm. Try to stay calm. Kessler paced behind her, speaking into the radio as if she couldn't hear. Black female, about 40, dark gray Camry. Detained for questioning. Possibly connected to the recent burglary. He didn't mention her calm tone. He didn't say she hadn't resisted. He didn't say her eyes hadn't wavered once. Another female officer arrived. She didn't ask much, just looked at Tanya's handcuffs and then at Kessler. There was something between the two of them. A past? An unspoken suspicion. Tanya spoke, softly. "Officer, my identification, in my wallet, front seat. You can check it." Kessler looked at her, as if she had said something unacceptable. "You stay there until I tell you otherwise." "I understand. But it might clarify a few things." Her voice was even, low, not defiant. Just the confidence that had kept her alive over the years. Kessler hesitated. 1 second. 2. Then, as if to assert who had the authority. He pulled open the car door, leaned over to search her purse. As if she were a convicted felon. Tanya heard the rummaging, the rustling of papers. Then, silence. So long that the air seemed to stand still. "What is this?" Kessler's voice trailed off. "What is this?" A badge glinted in the afternoon sun. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent Tanya J. Whitfield. 17 years of service. Kessler stood still, her back stiff. The two female officers leaned in to take a closer look. One of them raised an eyebrow. A long silence. No one spoke. Then Kessler turned. Slowly. Confused. Maybe remorseful. Or confused. Maybe both. Tanya looked at him, saying nothing. Just a look, enough to say she understood. And then, she said, as gently as before. Now, do you want to ask me about the theft? Tanya's question rang out, not as an accusation, but as a long-awaited truth. Her voice held no anger, no rise. It was, quiet, but enough to make the air pause for a second. Kessler took a step toward her, a little awkward, as if her silence made him feel alone in the large room. "We're going to take these off you," he said softly, not daring to look her in the eye. Tanya leaned slightly, exposing her wrists so he could reach the cuffs. Not because she trusted him, but because she wanted to get it over with, as nicely as possible. He fumbled with the key, his hands shaking slightly. The metal clicked once, twice, and finally the cuffs came free. Tanya rubbed her wrists, but only for a moment. "Are you okay?" The policewoman's voice rang out, with genuine concern for the first time. A crack in the coldness, the first hint of humanity. Tanya looked up, her eyes no longer defensive, but determined. "Physically, yes." The answer was clear enough, the rest was uncertain. Kessler avoided her gaze. "There's been a string of incidents in this area," he began, his voice dry. "Your car matches." "Match what?" Tanya interrupted, keeping her voice even. "A confirmed description, the license plate." He couldn't continue. The words stuck in his throat. Tanya didn't frown, didn't show contempt. Just a straight look, no avoidance, no judgment. "You saw me. And you decided to escalate the situation. And now, you're just embarrassed. Not because of what you did. But because I wore the badge." Silence. But different. There was no more protocol to hide behind. No more excuses to cling to. Kessler nodded slightly. "You're right. I was wrong." Tanya looked at her car, then back at him. "You weren't wrong. You chose wrong. There's a difference." Her words weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to remind. Not to punish, but to keep from being forgotten. She didn't ask for an apology. And she didn't expect one. The policewoman looked at Tanya, confused. Half wanting to apologize, half not sure what had just happened. She looked like she wanted to say something, but then fell silent. Kessler took a breath, about to say more, but Tanya raised her hand gently, not to interrupt, but to finish. "I need my badge." Just a little taller than Whisper, a silver-gray SUV parked quietly in the yellow light of the supermarket parking lot. Kessler stood there, holding two pieces of paper, his eyes shifting from the image to the name. Tanya Whitfield. Federal agent. Tanya pulled her phone out of the car. No rush, no anger. She just opened the camera, then took a picture of her wrist, red and marked, like the marks of time and work. Then she took a picture of his name tag, Officer Thomas Kessler. She didn't say what she was going to do. She didn't need to. And the moment Kessler opened his small black wallet to check, and saw the badge, everything froze. The wallet was neatly placed on the passenger seat, exactly where Tanya Whitfield had left it. The gold badge glinted, reflecting the soft dome light. Beside it was her federal ID, with her name, her picture, her title plain as day. Unmistakable. Undeniable. Tanya stared at it for a moment. Not in anger. Not in spite. Just, because it was a part of her. She reached out, carefully picking it up. She held it in her hand, not to show off. But as someone who held on to a chapter of her life, one that had been bought with long nights, tests, and silent sacrifices. Not something to be thrown around. Especially by someone who had never asked her name. Officer Thomas Kessler stood there, his arms folded awkwardly. His entire posture had changed. His initial loud authority was gone. What replaced it was a mixture of embarrassment and defensiveness, as if he wanted to say something, but no longer trusted his own mouth. "Whitfield," he said finally, clearing his throat. His voice trying to be serious, as if seriousness would erase the mistake. "I apologize again for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Tanya repeated, softly, almost to herself. She nodded. "For you, it's an inconvenience," she said, her eyes fixed on the distant lights. "For me, it's a survival reflex." Kessler blinked. "Sometimes, we have to make quick decisions on the scene," he said, his voice quieter. "Things happen quickly. We're trained to." She interrupted him, not rudely, but firmly enough. "You're trained to assess. To ask questions. To follow procedures." She paused. "You've missed it all." He bowed his head. For a moment, no one spoke. Tanya turned slightly to the other officer, the younger one, silent the whole time. "What's your name?" she asked. "Garcia. Second Officer Miguel Garcia." She nodded. "Thank you for keeping your cool. I appreciate that." Garcia's lips moved, then she said quietly. "Agent Whitfield, I apologize on his behalf." Tanya smiled a small smile. Exhausted, but genuine. "It's not because I'm a federal agent," she said. "It's not because I have a badge." She looked at them both. "It's because I'm a human being. And I deserve to be asked my name." The tension in the air lifted a little. Garcia nodded deeply. Kessler just stood there, no more defenses. Just a man learning an old lesson, the hard way. And Tanya walked away, unhurried. Step by step, gently, but firmly. Because sometimes, true power comes from remaining calm in the face of injustice. The woman remained silent. Standing silently on the sidewalk. Under the dim streetlights. "What's your name?" Tanya asked the police officer Jenna Rollins. The answer was no hesitation, no evasion. Just a tired voice. "Jenna Rollins. You saw how he handled this. You saw me cooperate completely. And you saw him ignore all the basic procedures." Tanya's voice was not high, not shaky, but clear. "Are you going to report this?" Rollins took a slow step back. Her eyes wavering between principle and propriety. "I'll talk to my supervisor," she said. Tanya looked at her for a long moment. Not angry. Just tiredness building in her eyes. "Okay." She turned back to Kessler. "Do you know what could happen? If I reacted the wrong way, even a little. If I raised my voice in fear. You didn't know I was an FBI agent. You knew nothing. And still decided I was a threat." Kessler didn't answer. He didn't have any words. There was no reason to lie. Tanya backed into the car. Leaning against the door. Trying to catch her breath. She had always kept her composure. But now, in the silence, a heaviness began to creep in. Not just from this moment. But from years of living with the reality. That this could happen. Would happen. No matter how many badges or titles she wore. Rollins stepped forward. Her voice softened. "Agent Whitfield. Do you want us to call a supervisor to the scene?" Tanya shook her head. "No, I'll handle this my way." She opened her phone. Checked the photo of Kessler's name tag. And took another. Her wrists. Still marked with red cuffs. Not bloody. But deep, and clear. As if they were real. Kessler stood there. A few feet away. Like a man who knew a storm was coming. But had no umbrella, no shelter. Tanya looked straight at him. You made your choice tonight. Now it's my turn. She got into the car. Without knocking on the door. Without accelerating. There was only the soft hum of the engine. And a woman driving home. Without looking back. She didn't cry. The drive had only taken a few minutes. But it was enough for her to remember. One small thing, from her mother. You will have to be stronger than justice requires. And she knew. Tonight. She had done it. Every moment, still replayed in her mind like a never-ending movie. Tanya didn't want to watch it again. Not because she was afraid. But because she was so tired. Tired of everything coming so suddenly, like a storm without warning. Tired of feeling like everything was happening so naturally, like, that was what always happened to someone like her. And what sent a chill down her spine? She knew that, if it weren't for that badge, she would still be handcuffed. Standing on the side of the road in silence. Or, worse. But Tanya didn't turn away. She didn't choose silence. She filed a report, and it was at that moment that the story truly began. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains, waking Tanya early. She hadn't slept much. Her wrists still throbbed, not from the tightness of the handcuffs, but from the memory that still burned there. Tanya sat in the kitchen, a steaming cup of black coffee in her hands. In front of her was a blank sheet of paper, as blank as her mind. She hadn't written a statement yet. Instead, she sat there, silently replaying every detail. Every flash of light, every word, every tiny moment. To make sure that when she wrote it, it would be the clear, coherent truth, without embellishment or omission. Just the truth, nothing more, nothing less. At the Atlanta field office, Tanya walked past colleagues she'd worked with for years. Most of them had no idea what had happened the night before. She didn't scream, didn't expose. She just quietly asked to see someone from internal affairs. The interview room was cold and empty, as if deliberately designed to confront one. Tanya sat at one end of a long table, her hands clasped in her lap. Across from her was Gregory Sims, an investigator with a practiced gaze and a slow smile. He didn't interrupt. Not once. He just sat there, flipping through his notebook, taking notes in a careful scrawl. Tanya recounted everything. No evasion. No attempt to hide her emotions. From the moment she was asked to stop. To the moment she felt she was being seen through as if she weren't human. To the moment Kessler saw her badge. When she finished, Mr. Sims raised his head slowly. "You're not the first person to mention that name," he said, his voice low but not cold. Tanya frowned slightly. "You mean?" Sims sighed, running a hand over the page she had written on. "There's a growing pile of reports. All related to Officer Kessler." At that moment, Tanya didn't feel relieved. But she wasn't alone. And it was the first step. The beginning of something better, for her, and perhaps, for many others. "I didn't do this for myself," Tanya said, her voice quiet but clear, her eyes never leaving Sims. He nodded, listening. In front of them, a thin file, but heavy. Names, unanswered questions, unwarranted stops, needless looks of suspicion. "The past 18 months, Tanya said, slowly, as if counting the drops of time that fell. 3 black men, under 25. 2 Latina women. 1 Navy veteran." She looked straight at Sims. "They've all spoken. And they've all been met with silence." Her fingers curled into fists in her lap, not in anger, but in helplessness that had gone on for too long. And nothing happened. No one was transferred, no disciplinary action was announced. They just retrained. Re-advised. Then left it as is. Sims let out a soft sigh, barely audible in the quiet room. "The department is reluctant to go public with this. You know. You mean they're covering for him? Tanya narrowed her eyes, not asking a question. Sims didn't argue. So what now? She asked. I'll take your complaint formally, he replied. Because of my position, it won't be buried. I promise it'll go straight to the disciplinary board. Tanya nodded. Slowly. Not because she was reassured, but because she needed to believe in something. But I won't pretend, Sims added. The system doesn't always work the way it should. But your complaint carries weight, Tanya. More than you think. I didn't do this to wait and see what happens, Tanya replied, her eyes softening. I did it because I know there are people who don't have badges, who don't know what their rights are. If they were in my shoes, they wouldn't have a chance. Sims looked at her, nodding, a small, understanding nod. Before she left, Tanya handed him a stack of photos. There was one, clear, of her badge on her wrist, the clear mark of an unwarranted stop. The time stamp is in the lower left corner, she said. Thank you, Tanya. I'll keep in touch, Sims said, and left the room. Out in the parking lot, Tanya sat quietly in her car. She didn't cry. She didn't call anyone. She didn't leave right away. Just stared at the concrete wall in front of her, pale, cold gray. She thought of the names that would never be placed on the table like Sims. The ones without badges. The ones without titles. The ones who had been considered problems, and then forgotten. But Tanya would not forget. Not this time. Never. That afternoon, her phone rang. A long-distance call, the familiar text, Lena, Atlanta, USA. It was an old friend from the States, now working at a law firm in DeKalb County. The news is spreading fast, Lena said, her voice quiet. You actually filed it. Yeah, Tanya replied, sighing softly. You knew this was going to get messy, right? I was counting on it, Tanya replied, almost in a whisper. She hung up and went back to her notes. Names. Dates. Questions. No one had asked until now. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. The exposure of the truth had attracted attention Tanya hadn't anticipated. 2 days later, Tanya's name was on local Twitter feeds. Trending. Though she had never spoken a word to the press. It all began with a leak. Someone inside the bureau had shared details of an internal report. A high-ranking federal agent had been illegally detained by a local official. No one knew who had leaked it. The story spread faster than anyone could have predicted. By noon that day, a local journalist had pieced together the information and published a story headlined, FBI agent mistaken for suspect, arrested by McDonough police. They didn't mention her name. But everyone knew who it was. Within hours, her inbox was filled with interview requests, messages of support, and accusations from strangers. Tanya read each line, not reacting. But her eyes were wet. Not out of fear. But out of a sense that, finally, someone was listening. Outside the department, a few dozen protesters gathered, holding signs that read, "What if she doesn't? Stop presumption-based policing." The tension was raw. But in the crowd, there was a young woman carrying a sign that read, "Thank you for not being silent." The story was no longer about Tanya. It had struck a collective nerve. She didn't seek attention. But she couldn't turn back either. That afternoon, Tanya was called into a private meeting. At the FBI office. 2 senior officials sat across from her. In a glass-walled room. Their tone was respectful. But also cautious. "This has become public faster than we anticipated," one said. "I didn't reveal it," Tanya replied, unblinking. "I just filed a report." "That's all we need to know," the other said. "And, we trust you." There was a long pause. For the first time in weeks. Tanya felt someone standing with her, not just outside. As she stepped out of the room, the sunset filtered through the glass. As gently as a touch of hope. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, Tanya didn't feel alone. Tanya Jacobs never expected to be speaking to the local press in a small town, amid the harsh lights and constant whispers. She was a federal agent, perhaps too outspoken to please the moderates, and too determined to ignore what was going on. She had been arrested after an argument, as they called it, at a checkpoint on the edge of town. But the truth was clearer, it had been a misdemeanor. A police officer had overstepped his authority. She had spoken up. And then everything exploded. "Call it what it is," Tanya said, her eyes fixed on the commander sitting across from her in the internal hearing room. The older of the two, the department representative, leaned forward. "If this situation escalates, are you prepared to speak publicly?" "This is not a political issue," Tanya said, without hesitation. "But I won't stay silent. And I won't go home like nothing happened." Word spread quickly. Local news outlets began showing pictures of her, comments that were half complimentary, half scornful. A truck parked across the street from her house, strangers hovering outside her door. Some neighbors brought baked goods and concerned looks. Others just stood there, watching. On social media, the debate became a battleground. Some praised Tanya for standing her ground, for her composure and courage. Others were skeptical, saying she was using her badge to gain prestige. But what bothered Tanya most were the whispers: nothing would have happened if she had just followed. As if silence were a virtue. As if obedience was the only way to survive. On the third day, Officer Kessler was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The ministry issued a 2-sentence statement, saying it would look into the situation carefully. Vague, distant, impersonal. But this time, people didn't believe it. The following weekend, Tanya got a call from the Reverend Elijah Freeman, in Covington, less than a half-hour's drive away. "We don't want to make you a symbol," he said, his voice low and sincere. "We just think people need to hear your story." Tanya was quiet. Then she agreed. On Saturday night, the church hall was packed. Folding chairs spilled out into the aisles. People stood against the walls, crowding the back of the hall. Tanya sat in the front row, hands in her lap, eyes still. When her name was announced, there was no applause. Just silence, thick, taut as a string. She stepped up to the podium. She looked around the room. Then down at her hands, gently gripping the edge of the podium. And when she spoke, her voice didn't shake. She didn't speak loudly. But each word, each sentence, rang out as clear as the morning sun, a story not just about injustice, but about responsibility, about community, and how no one should have to choose between honesty and survival. At the end of the session, a teenager stepped forward, clutching a notebook. "You make me want to go to law school," he said. Tanya smiled. She knew there was more to come. But at least tonight, in this place, silence wasn't the only option. "That I'm not there to impress," Tanya began, her voice soft but firm. "I'm not there to prove anything. Just a woman who did everything she was taught. And still found herself pushed face first into the cold hood. Because she looked like someone they'd heard of." The room was breathlessly silent. No rustle, no whisper. Only Tanya's voice, clear, weighty. "I don't share this for sympathy," she said, her eyes scanning the front row, where several brown and black teenagers sat as still as statues. "I share this because it's true." As she finished, a little girl with pigtails tied back at the nape of her neck looked up and asked, "Weren't you scared?" Tanya smiled, "Yes. But I'm more afraid if I stay silent." A week after the town hall talk, Tanya was alone on a faded wooden bench. Outside the small community center in Stonecrest. The air was chilly, but her heart was warm. She hadn't planned to speak today. The youth mentoring program was for someone else. But Jean, a retired teacher, who had held the hands of countless children through hardships, called Tanya with one sentence. They need to see someone like you. Not just because of what you've been through, but because of how you've continued to live with it. Tanya didn't come to be an icon. She didn't care about the articles with her picture. Or the empty compliments. She didn't calm down to shine. She was calm because the other choice could be the end. Inside the small living room, everything was plain. Plastic chairs lined up, the tile floor discolored. On the podium, a medical student was telling her story of her journey to becoming a doctor. Tanya stood at the back of the room, just listening and watching. Until Miss Jean waved her forward. A few heads turned. A few wary eyes. But Tanya was undaunted. She stepped forward, without introduction. And then, something no one expected. The little girl with braids from the city hall day ran up to hug her. Said nothing. Just held her tight. Tanya knelt down, looked into those eyes. I miss you. You made me believe I wasn't invisible. And in that moment, no applause, no spotlight. Tanya knew the reason she kept going. It was because of kids like these. Kids who were looking at her. And seeing themselves. Her face had been in a few local papers. Her name was Tanya, you might have seen her in an article titled, More Than a Few Reasons. She walked to the front of the classroom that day, her eyes scanning the room. There was no script. No microphone. I didn't really plan on coming up here to say anything today, she began. But I'm glad I did. A few kids sat up straight, hands in their laps, eyes on her. I want to tell you about a moment, she said, her voice even. A moment that could have gone bad. Very bad. She didn't overdo it. There was no dramatic tone. She didn't need to. Tanya recounted. About that afternoon, when she was pulled over. About the way the cop yelled instead of talking. About how she had to keep her voice soft, her hands slow. Not because she felt safe. But because she knew, one small misstep. And she could be misinterpreted completely. She told me about the cold handcuffs. About the silence. About the badge, not the police, but the official ID she held out. And how, upon seeing it, everything suddenly changed. Then she paused. A breath. A pause. You know what scares me the most? She asked, looking around the room. That if I didn't have that ID, who would I be to him? Not a person. Not a professional. Just a file. A boy sitting near the front, about 15, raised his hand, hesitantly. If you didn't have that ID, what would you do? Tanya let the question hang in the air. I don't know, she said, and her eyes looked a little far away. And that's what bothers me most at night. The room was silent. But not out of shock. Out of listening. Out of respect. A girl with thick braids and a notebook on her lap spoke softly. Do you think that cop will be fired? I don't know, Tanya said. But I do know one thing. I spoke up. Not just for me. But for all the people who have been stopped on the side of the road. And had no title to protect them. There was a round of applause, small, quiet. Then another. Not loud. Not forced. But genuine. After the talk, a few students approached her. A boy asks for advice on how to deal with people in power and still maintain his dignity. A girl says, maybe, she wants to study law. Tanya stays. She listens. Not teaching. Just being there, as someone who has been there. And still keeping her heart gentle. When Tanya stepped out of the building again, the sun had set behind the trees, leaving a soft amber glow across the parking lot. The light was not blinding, but it seemed to embrace her, a silent embrace after a long day. Miss Jean followed, holding a clear plastic cookie box, carefully sealed. "Nobody brought me here to be a role model," she said softly, her voice not strained, just the words of someone who had seen enough. "But in the end, that's what you are." Tanya smiled softly, unhurriedly, a smile that felt like a warm breath after a cold wind. "I just wanted someone to listen," she replied. Jean nodded. "And I did. And I listened to the whole community." That evening, Tanya sat on the back porch. There were no more questions, no more judgmental looks. Just a breeze blowing through the trees, and the night began to settle like a thin blanket. She swiped her phone. A message appeared at the top of the screen, from an officer at the police station she had trained with when she was younger. "I'm proud of the way you stood your ground that day. We still have a long way to go, but you remind me why I started." Tanya didn't text back right away. She didn't need to say anything. Instead, she put the phone down, leaned back in her chair, and looked up at the slowly turning night sky. Everything was quiet, but not silent. This wasn't a story about teaching someone a lesson. It wasn't about standing up and saying, "I was right." It was about reminding people that dignity doesn't come from power. It existed before you had a title, a badge, or a desk. If you ever feel judged before you're understood, speak up. Because silence doesn't just hurt you, it allows wrongs to continue. If this story touches you, share it. Listen more. Let more people be seen, understood, and respected, not because they're perfect, but because they're worthy.